Hi everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in. I'm sure you clicked on the channel because you're interested in the dream, and I definitely want to get into that. But let me just tell you, I have tried to make this video so many times, and it is difficult for me. So just bear with me. I am going to try this one more time. So before I get into the dream, I kind of want to explain the circumstances surrounding the dream at that point in time in my life. I was, becoming more and more aware of things that are going on in the world, and I was growing in my faith, and it really was impressed upon me to start being more obedient and spreading the gospel. And at that time, I kind of lumped Christians into two categories, that when we think of spreading the gospel, we're either on the far left hand side or we're on the far right hand side. On the right is mission trips, where a lot of us Christians will go to the far corners of the earth, to the most austere, poverty stricken locations, and that's a wonderful thing to do. Or we're on the far left hand side, where it's like when we are spreading the gospel or we are talking about Jesus, we often will do it with fellow brothers and sisters just because that's what we're comfortable with. That's where we know we're going to be accepted and received. And, talking to one another is good because it is encouragement, and we definitely learn from each other's testimonies and things like that. But there's this huge gray area in the middle, especially for me personally, that I knew I needed to focus on improving, just because it's the bulk of the time I spend my daily life, whether at home, work, or with friends, and that for whatever reason, spreading the gospel was just kind of lacking, to say the least. So after, really realizing this and being impressed upon my heart that I needed to make improvements, is I started actually spreading the gospel, and I ended up facing a lot of hardships with that. And I left the little line blank there because you can pretty much imagine what it would be like when you're spreading the gospel at work, when there's like HR and people are offensive or find it offensive, or how people are just not really open to our beliefs. And there's just a lot that kind of deters us. There's a lot of consequences that you can face, a lot of hardships when you essentially try and blend beliefs into like our daily lives, especially with non-believers. So during this time, the hardships that I faced were personal, they were professional, they were both in the physical world, and they were also spiritual attacks, like attacks specifically like at night in dreams and things like that. And so because it just was so prolonged, and I just had a lot of heartbreak from people that I really just wanted to help, that it hardened me and it made me stop doing it. And that's exactly what the enemy wanted. And then to kind of replace some of that sadness in my heart, I was really focusing on like the rapture and like the good parts that we have as the body of Christ to look forward to. And that is, there's nothing really wrong with that, but at the same time, it's about keeping that balance. So at that time, it was mostly, I was angry about things that had happened, and then I was kind of trying to rationalize in my head that like I'm gonna go to heaven and I'm gonna experience these wonderful things. And then that's when I had this dream. So in this dream, I was definitely humbled, to say the least. So at the very beginning of the dream, I honestly don't remember what I'm doing. I'm just aware that I am standing upright and that my feet are firmly planted on the ground. And then suddenly I am pulled up with such an immense force, and I am now looking at the roof of my house from this aerial perspective. I'm just like floating above it. And then in a mere seconds, I go from being on top of my house to now being in outer space. And I know that sounds absolutely insane, but that's what happened. I call this supernatural travel because I honestly don't know what else to call it. So basically, the travel time felt like a mere 1 or 2 seconds, but somehow, despite that lightning speed, I had precise memory of all of the visual data. So as I was being brought higher and higher, I remember seeing like the house, I remember seeing the neighborhood, excuse me, I remember seeing like the remaining town, city, state, all the way up into the sky, and then boom, I'm here. So as you can imagine, that time frame being so short, but then having that memory of everything as if I was going slow motion was so startling to my system that I was hyperventilating at this point in time. I'm looking around. I am so baffled of the fact that I am in space. I cannot believe it. I wish that there was a way that I could just explain the intensity and the fear. Um, but basically, I definitely know that something is wrong, because I'm thinking to myself, like, if this were the rapture, then like, where is Jesus, and like, where is everyone else, and why do I not have peace and joy? And so I end up looking behind me, and even though the video, it's not pitch black right now, but that's essentially what I was seeing, was just this infinite distance of just void. And it was so heavy on me. It was so just engulfing me all around. And I just was longing for God's presence. And I just didn't feel that at all. And it scared me so much that I couldn't bear it anymore. And I ended up turning back around to look back at the earth, just because that was the only thing that was illuminated. And again, I am completely and utterly alone as I'm just floating in space looking at earth. So realizing like this is not the rapture, something is awfully wrong, maybe God is even angry at me, I just start profusely praying and crying and just pleading for forgiveness and that I can go back to earth. And fortunately, Jesus being so merciful and loving, that he didn't leave me in that state of mind very long, and I ended up waking up. So even after I have woken up, I can still just remember everything about that dream, how I felt, what it looked like, and it stayed with me for so long. And I think it's excuse me, it's just so hard to really put it into words, that kind of feeling of separation from God. But I really do think, after a while, I came to understand that that wasn't God trying to punish me necessarily. It was just him kind of disciplining me and helping me understand that his commandment is to feed my sheep, that the harvest is plentiful, but laborers are few, and that he wants us to go and spread the gospel, and that he is aware that there's going to be wolves. Like, he knows there's going to be hardships, and that at that time, I kind of put all of this scripture uh, on the backhand, and then I put my personal feelings and my own ego and pride ahead of Jesus. And clearly he says, keep my commandments. And here I am professing myself as a true Christian. And yet at the moment that I received hostility, I was willing to take a reprieve, and then thought that I actually like deserved it, like that I deserved a break after like what people had said and the things that they did to harm me at work and etc. And that dream was so humbling. And then it brought me to Romans, where it says, for by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. So I hope that this is kind of helpful. I'm not sure if any of you have been in a situation where you were trying to spread the gospel and it just didn't go according to your plan, and then you kind of became disgruntled, or maybe you just felt a lot of pain by things that people may have done to retaliate against you. But I think that the point is that Jesus knows, like, he knows it's difficult, he knows what you're going up against, but he's overcome all of that, and that he just wants you to try every day to be more and more like him. And with that dream, I felt like I was understanding kind of where Jesus was coming from, as far as like, we're thinking about the rapture as being great, but there's obviously a whole nother side of that for people that are going to be left behind, and that Jesus is not happy about that he is very sad about those people that didn't know him. And there's wrath going to come upon this world, and we should be thinking about how can we save those people in addition to how can we also ensure that we have salvation and that our lamps are full of oil. And so when I kind of was tipping the scale more towards myself and not recognizing that other people didn't have the same experiences that I did, didn't have the same childhood that I did, where I just was lucky, that I came to this earth to a family that was Christian, and that a lot of people don't. And people just don't know sometimes, like what you're talking about, and they have their own personal reasons for being resentful maybe towards Christians or angry towards God, and they just, they don't know yet. And you have to be patient about that. You have to understand that people are going to go about their journey in very different ways, and that God is going to speak to them in very different ways, and that it's not about us to try and change people. It's just about us spreading the gospel and letting Jesus do the rest. And even if you have hardships, don't let that deter you, because ultimately I do feel that Jesus is kind of holding us to a higher standard just because we do know. And so it's very important that we keep his commandments. I think that's about it. I think I finally got through the video. I hope that was helpful to you guys, and I wish you a very happy and blessed day. Talk to you later.